53rd and 3rd, standing on the streets. 53rd and 3rd, I'm trying to turn a trick. 53rd and 3rd, you're the one they never pick. 53rd and 3rd, don't it make you feel sick? Hello, my name is Summer, and this is Paying For It.
I got something between my legs gonna make a dead man come on. I got something between my legs gonna make a dead man come on. I'm gonna turn back my mattress and let you all my springs. I want you to blind me, daddy, till the bell do ring. Oh, daddy, I want you to shade and dry.
Thank you for being here for episode 30, baby. I'm so excited. Boo, and welcome to spooky season. One of my favorite times. Listen, I'm a spooky girly, okay? I love spooky season. I'm very excited. I'm honestly just a season girly. I get excited for all the seasons, but I am a particular girl who loves the horror genre, so Halloween is just so special to me. We are going to look into some darker and spookier stories this month, but this is Paying For It, baby. So you know it's going to be more than just dark, gritty stories. They're going to be dark, gritty stories. They're going to be darker and grittier stories involving, of course, sex work. We're going to get into some stories that are on the darker side of sex work, stories that I normally stray away from during, I guess, the regular season. To kick this season off, we'll be going to the corner in the 60s and 70s. We're going to explore the life of someone who will give a voice to the misfits, of those who were so very angry and had a real reason to be angry. His story will take us to the corner where he will meet and be influenced by some punks. How being on the corner in that time can turn into a moment that shifts culture in a way that no one probably expected. But being on a corner isn't an easy life, and something brings you there. What it is the true problem, not actually the job itself. However, to become a legend, can you make it there without battle scars, both mentally and physically? We will be getting to all that and more on today's episode, but before we do, hello, how are we? I hope we are all doing well today. I have been doing pretty good. I swear my life isn't as crazy as it always seems, but you know, it's been a wild week. I had a crazy last week at work. We were just very busy unexpectedly, but you know, that's all right. We made it through. And also, we're in the process of looking for a new car, and now 2 new cars. So it's been just a wild week, but we'll get there. We'll get through it. And happy October, everyone. I am so excited for spooky season, clearly. And if you're not watching on YouTube, well, you should go over to YouTube because I'm there now, my face in all its glory. And yeah, I'm feeling more confident and excited to be back And yeah, back on a roll, hopefully. Fingers crossed. I'm not going to jinx myself. Anyways, we've got a new setup today. Why that is because I didn't like my window in the other setting, okay? It looked out to the parking lot and it was pretty boring. And I always, when I was editing, would be like, oh, I didn't realize you could see the cars driving by every 2 seconds. So we're adjusting, we're changing, and this might not be permanent where we are right now, but it looks pretty dope at the moment. So we'll probably do some adjustments as I edit this, and we'll go from there. But yeah, we got a little spooky vibe going on. You can't really see it in the background up in the top corner though. We've got Pennywise, and that whole like shelf above the fireplace is decked out. My whole apartment's decked out. The background will get more and more spooky. I have to get some spider web. I thought I had some. He's gone. I don't know where it went. So yeah, stay tuned. But yeah, I don't know. We got some very exciting stories that, well, my Halloween story, the one that I'm excited to really get into, it's been on my list for a year now. When I wanted to do this podcast, I started with trying, I started where I thought I should. And while like writing the first couple episodes, I also took time to write a bunch of like stories that I was interested in and like things I'd be down to do. And I came across a story involving the government and sex work. So I don't want to get too much into it because I'm very excited for it, and I've been literally dying to do this. I knew it was going to be my Halloween episode back in December or freaking February. What? How did I go from December to February? But back in December, or like really back in October, when I was starting to think about this podcast and starting to really think I was going to do it. So I had already had my Halloween episode planned and ready even before we were anywhere. Like Halloween had just passed, okay? Anyways, I'm very excited. I have a whole bunch of episodes, 5 episodes that I think are going to be fascinating, and I think you're going to like them. Darker, more spooky. Some of them are more spooky. Some of them are just darker. Some of them are just gritty. And yeah, that's today's story. It's like a gritty story that we're going to get into. So I hope you're excited. I'm excited. Yeah, pretty much that's it. Shall we get into it? I think we shall. All right. Let's dive into the wild, dark world of punk culture and one of its founding members, taking us down a very gritty road of the birth of punk rock. Also exploring how punk rock culture is so tied to not only hustling, but the LGBTQ plus community. Our story will keep us in New York pretty much most of the time, and we'll be spending most of our time in this story on the corner of 53rd and 3rd, where we will take a look at what it's like for our slightly historical misfits, lonely, lost men when they had no other option and turned to the streets for family, community, and money. This is truly a story of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So with that, you know what time it is. Grab yourself a cocktail, a mocktail, a coffee, whatever you fancy. Today, I've got myself a little mocktail of champagne. I just got myself a little bit of sparkling cider, and listen, you can judge me all you want, but to be honest, sparkling cider has always held my heart since I was a young kid, and as I've gotten older, I still drink it. I like this shit. So yeah, I have to work later, and I thought, what the hell? Let's have some champagne. Which is so very silly. I know. But whatever you have, I hope you're enjoying it. And cheers, 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 cheers. Let me introduce you to one of the founding members of punk rock, Dee Dee Ramone. Born Douglas Glenn Colvin on September 18th, 1951, in Fort Lee, Virginia. His father was in the military and his mother was a German-born living in the U.S. It's odd because I could not actually find any real information on his parents, nor could I find their names or anything like that. I'm not sure why that was. I might not have just been looking in the right places, or it's just not as widely known. This story does not take place that back in the future. I mean, in the 50s, it's a while back. But some of these stories we're talking 1800s, and we still know their parents' names. So I have no idea why I couldn't find Douglas's parents' name, but I couldn't. And they're not that important to the story, except they kind of are, but in a way that it doesn't matter what their names are. So they don't seem to be the kindest of people in this world. They especially weren't the best to their son, Douglas. So it doesn't really matter too much what their names are, but what their dynamic definitely matters, because it will shape the boy who we will eventually know as Dee Dee Ramone. Stories like this, people like Douglas don't become who they are if they come from a perfect upbringing. That's just facts. Most of our rock and roll fame and notorious figures, even people in mobs and the Wild Wild West days that I seem to love so much, the people that become history makers don't come from a background that screams, I've had the best living ever, my parents treated me so well, and I love life. And that is the sad fact of reality when it comes to a lot of people who make history. As an infant, though, his family, due to new military orders that his father got, gets relocated to West Berlin, West Germany. When it comes time for Douglas to start school, he is still in Germany, right? So he is going to be placed in a school that is with a ton of other military children. And I don't know if you know much about military life, but the thing about being a child growing up in the military is that you have to get very used to having people come and go in your life. You can at times have a very, very lonely childhood and existence. Getting to know friends who either you or they have, or both sides have parents in the military. It's like this weird culture that happens that you're once you're in the military, you're only around other people who are in the military, living in military cities, and often you're getting, as the parents are getting different orders to go different places. So once you find someone in your life that you connect with and you've actually started to build a relationship, whether that's a friendship or whatever, just that quickly they can be ripped away from you. And in the 50s, it's not like it was easily able to just pick up the FaceTime and have that face-to-face contact, or even the phone. It just wasn't that easy. So keeping in contact with friends who were constantly in and out of your life was not easy and really brewed for a lonely childhood. So Douglas lives in one of these communities of people who are constantly coming and going. As a child of a military family, you are You are the only constant. Your family is your only constant. Your immediate family, your father, your mother, and any siblings you may have. So when your constant is not quite healthy, things can become a little bit sketchy. So for people like Douglas, when their constants, their family isn't good or healthy, you really can only grow up depending on yourself. And that comes with years and your childhood, your informative years being shown over and over again that your family isn't here for you the way they should be, or, you don't even know that that's how life is, You are just constantly seeing over and over again that for whatever reason, you as a child cannot depend on the people you should be able to depend on. So you kind of turn into your own self. You start to rely on who you are as a person. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't for all military children. A lot of military children can grow up and have a very fine and perfect life. What I'm saying is it's for certain people who sometimes are military families who grow up in a very lonely childhood, and those families aren't there for you when they should be, and you cannot grow to depend on them to keep you safe and healthy and happy. Douglas's life is one of chaos as he's growing up with a very alcoholic and abusive father, and both of his parents preferred him not around. His parents fought with each other a lot, and according to Douglas, he doesn't really like to talk about this time that much, but we know that it was pretty rough going. And because of this, he spent most of his time trying to avoid his parents altogether on half the time, and then the other half of the time being ignored by his parents when they were stable, So when they're fighting, of course, he doesn't want to be around them. But when they're calm and he thinks it's safe, they don't want him around. So he spends half his time just avoiding, and the other half, when he is looking for that attention, they aren't willing to give it. According to Douglas, his parents didn't give a fuck what he was doing as long as they weren't bothering them. So he could go out about his business as long as they just weren't talking to him, So it was at a young age that Douglas is kind of sucked into himself. He learns he can only really depend on himself, and he sees the world around him as a very bleak and dark place, making him really turn into his own brain. Douglas spends most of his time in his imaginary world, creating a world within himself. According to Douglas, it's the first grade that he is suspended and that he never goes back to school. Instead, he spends his time exploring the ruins of the war around him. I don't know if this is true. I cannot figure it out. I'm sure it's not. I'm sure he was in and out of school throughout his whole life as a child, but it seems that he started getting in trouble pretty often and pretty young. And he's living in Germany. So the war has just recently kind of happened, and he gets to explore it. And he's so young that he doesn't really know the significance of what it is that he's looking at throughout this exploration. It's in Germany, exploring, that he finds Nazi war relics that he is just extremely fascinated by and finds beautiful. Douglas will later talk about how much these relics really did inspire his life and his vibe and just his style, honestly. And not great to be inspired by Nazi war like relics. It's not a great thing, and it's definitely not a great look, but this was a different time. At a certain point, his parents will find out he's collecting these Nazi war relics, and his parents rightfully do get upset, which makes sense, right? Like they should have the reason to be upset. However, at this point though, he's lost all respect for his parents and has no respect for any quote unquote authority they think they might have on him. He's like, oh, now all of a sudden you want to tell me something? He wasn't having it, so it didn't go their way. He continues collecting these relics, but instead he keeps them very hidden from his family. It is around 12 years old that Douglas is introduced and gets interested in drugs, specifically morphine, the drug of choice for Germany at the time, which is insane. This boy is 12 years old. It blows my mind a bit, to be honest, but that's reality for some children. So at 12, he's going to get introduced to morphine, and so now he's going to continue down this path of a kid just wandering, imagining, and now he has this drug that really, really helps him do this escapism even more than his imagination can. Now he's found this newfound freedom to escape to his own mind. It's also around this time that Douglas is going to pick up a guitar for the very first time. Even more now, his parents don't care what he's doing, just as long as he isn't around the house making noise with his guitar, bothering them, getting under their skin, irritating them, as he's trying to learn a hobby, something that will get him something other than freaking drugs, my dudes. Like, his parents, if all this, according to Douglas, is true, wow. Eventually, his parents' relationship, though, will come to an end, and his mom will move back to America. This move is to get away from her alcoholic husband, and she ends up with Douglas in New York City, and he's about 12 to 13, okay? Douglas ends up hating America. He feels like America is boring, they have no style, they're kind of cookie cutter, and he's just like, ugh, this is not the place for me. It's very soon after arriving in New York that 15-year-old Douglas will take off hitchhiking to nowhere in particular. It's on this adventure that he lands himself into some serious trouble. According to Douglas, he hitches a ride from some kids that apparently right off the bat kind of scare him. They're talking about murdering people, they have some crazy ideas, and he, according to Douglas, says he's very scared of them, and that's why he kind of doesn't try to get away from them. So when they start talking about this plan to, I don't know, rob a gas station, he's, according to Douglas, too scared to leave. So he partakes in robbing said gas station. The group of kids go on to rob the gas station at gunpoint. So armed robbery, okay? When attempting to flee, though, the getaway driver is going to stall their car, causing all the kids, including Douglas, to be arrested. At this point, Douglas is now in some deep, deep trouble, and he has no one to call on. During a moment of desperation, he's going to call his father, and he's going to ask for bail money. And it's weird to me because Either he just knew his mom wasn't going to be able to give him bail money, or he did attempt to try to call his mom. Whatever it is, he ends up calling his dad, who he's probably not spoken to in a while and had no real intentions to speak to him for a while, okay? But now he's in jail. He's in desperate times to call for desperate measures, so he calls his father. And his father basically tells him, you know what? Fuck you. I hope you rot there. This is what you deserve. And this is what you deserve, okay? And then he hangs up the phone. So his father basically, even though Douglas was expecting it, definitely slaps him in the motherfucking face. He's like, I'm not helping you. You deserve this. Bye. So now Douglas is stuck in this situation that he's gotten himself into. And some reports state that Douglas spent about 3 weeks. Others report 3 months behind bars. Either way, according to him, this was really, really tough on him mentally and physically. Going to prison is not easy. Jail is not easy. And for a kid, it's also pretty tough. And when you are kind of put into the system without any help or support system, it can be very mentally draining and challenging. It can really fuck you up, okay? When getting out of prison, though, Douglas is too scared to start hitchhiking again. So he's able to kind of somehow gather some money and scrape by to get a bus ticket. And he's not ready to go back to New York or go home, but he will. He will take a bus into California. Upon getting to Cali, he was nervous and kind of doesn't really like the city. And so he deals with that by taking muscaline. Upon entering the city, he's tripping balls pretty much, okay? And it's here that he finds himself getting introduced to sex work for a means of survival and to supply his drug habit, because it's important to note that at this point in Douglas's life, he's got a drug habit and he's an addict, because that's just what happens to boys and kids and girls too, who end up on the streets because their parents or just the world around them failed and they have no coping mechanisms, and they find something that helps them survive in their brain. It's helping them get through the tough times of living on the streets, okay? So he has to figure it out, and he does that by meeting a man. And this man's going to be an older, richer man who will allow him to stay in his house for a while, where this man will support him, buy his drugs, give him a place to live, put food on his plate, really support Douglas. And it's not confirmed, I don't think. I think maybe it is or maybe it's not. I'm not sure. But he was allowing Douglas to stay in his apartment because he was basically being a live-in boyfriend or live-in sex partner. And it was kind of, in a way, a very transactional relationship, because Douglas was here in his house using him for what he could offer, and Douglas was offering him what he had. So maybe no money was always really exchanged, but there was elements to exchanging goods for a service. Eventually, though, this relationship is going to end, and Douglas will find himself ready to go back to New York City, where a growing movement of misfits is arising. And this might have been kind of a world growing movement, but it really is boiling in New York. Back in New York, Douglas is going to find his misfit family. A misfit family, but a family nonetheless. just like most families, they're gonna be slightly dysfunctional, okay? However, before he could get there, he would find himself on the corner of 53rd and 3rd, where he would practice the trade of gay for pay, really honing in his skills of a hustler. Now, mind you, Douglas is coming back to New York in his late teens, maybe young adulthood. And at this point, he's used to living and surviving on the streets with other young youth who have also been failed one way or another by those who are supposed to protect them. With this youth that had been pushed off to the side and forgotten was a cultural movement brewing. Like most cultural shifts, it comes from our youth. And this movement was coming from the kids who had something very angry to be about. Among these kids was Douglas and Johnny. They will become friends. And honestly, from this friendship, the rest is history. They will take the rage of the kids on the street and bring it forth in a very raw and gritty way. Johnny and Tommy meet Douglas around the time he moves back to New York. Eventually, a brotherhood will form between these boys. They come from very similar but different backgrounds. Very broken or abusive homes, strict parents even, very rough, gritty childhood. At this point, though, Douglas is pretty dependent on heroin, and this will be his reason to end up at 53rd and 3rd. Not his only reason, because even though 53rd and 3rd was a corner where men could go to find other men willing to pay for sex, it also was a vice district almost on its own for a group of kids who were lost or basically abandoned. And so all of these boys find themselves somehow connected to this corner because that's where the drugs were. That's where the money was if you didn't have real means to get money. And that's where this new gritty culture was coming of these boys who were angry and pissed off because the world around them continuously failed them, and they felt that they had a reason to be pissed off about it. But at this corner of 53rd and 3rd, there he will find himself hustling along with the many other boys who had reasons of their own for being there. His reason was drugs, but he will meet others along the way on this corner that had very different reasons for hustling. Money, maybe survival, feeding a habit, or just needing extra cash. Every boy on that corner had a different story, but a similar story, and they all needed clearly money, but also a way to get that money, because some of these boys were thrown out, kicked out, just all out, just forced out, maybe. It's hard to explain the corner of 53rd and 3rd, but let me try. This street corner that was known for men who were selling sex, this was a corner was known to be part of this bigger section called the Loop. The Loop was basically an LGBTQ plus safe haven. The history of this district is so very significant and important to the LGBTQ plus community. Today, though, we are just trying to hone in and focus on the corner of 53rd and 3rd, the street that birthed rock, punk rock. Oddly, when trying to get information, though, on this corner, Well, not oddly, to be honest. Even though this corner is so significant, it is very also hidden from the world today because we like to hide and run away from our dark, gritty truths. We as a society like to pretend that these are just stories and that boys aren't really living this way and people aren't really feeling this way and people aren't really trying to live their truth in the best way they possibly can with the circumstances they're given. And so we like to forget and try to push that away. And that's what happened to 53rd and 3rd. Even though it's very significant in the world of punk, in the world of the New York LGBTQ community, it's hidden from everyone else because of its gritty nature, because of its quote-unquote immoral nature. I wanted a very outside perspective look into what life on the corner would have looked like, and it's kind of hard to find. I mean, I know this was in the 70s and this is something that the world of course was going to keep hidden, but it was such a cultural corner that I wish there was more information, and maybe I couldn't find it. I'm sure there is more information, I just didn't at this point know how to find it. But it is just a corner where boys who had been thrown out, kicked out, or forced to leave, or had to leave for their survival and well-being, found themselves if they needed money. I don't want to say all of the boys were desperate, because it could have been that some of the boys found themselves there willingly and happily, even though it was dangerous. Street work is not easy and it is not safe, but it is what a lot of the boys of our youth, especially back then, were faced with to survive. But when looking up 53rd and 3rd, what you will find instead of gritty stories or any information about the historical significance of this corner is a song by the Ramones. Because Douglas will go on to write a song about his time on 53rd and 3rd. And it is so interesting to think that with this song and the LGBTQ community, the history of this corner is now still held together in a way, even as the world tried to erase it. People and things like this can't be erased that easily. On this corner, you would find on any given day or night, a bunch of young adults, fingers crossed, of aged boys. And I don't say that lightly because a lot of these boys may have been kicked out or left to their own devices at a very, very young age. And when you have nowhere else to go and no real way to make a living, you can find yourself here. And a lot of these boys were kicked out due to their sexuality. It wasn't uncommon for parents to kick kids out, and I hope that it's getting less common, but sadly, the world we live in, I doubt it. But it was more common for fathers or even mothers to find out that their sons in particular were gay. Yeah, and they would kick them out of the house, force them out, and then they had to fight for survival. They had to find a new way to live. And a lot of those boys, not all of them, but a lot of them could find themselves on this corner selling sex to older men strolling the streets. Street sex work, like I said earlier, is very risky and can be extremely dangerous. But honestly, that's the kind of reality of men who wanted or needed to sell sex. But like, it's often that we can look into history and find real stories of women who had a very glamorous life. We can also look into history and find real stories of women who did it for survival. And we can look into history and find women stories who did it because lots of different reasons. Same for men. However, I have yet to come across, and I could be proven wrong, I'm sure I am proven wrong, of a case of a man doing sex work who had a more glamorous life, or it's more often that therefore, like, there's no like real brothels in history about, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, from what I can tell, they have it harder. The one and only job, I would say, that men have it harder in life when it comes to a job. Anyways, this corner you could find sex workers, but it was also an interesting enough place that disgruntled youth would start hanging out there. And it was where everyone got together. And like, this was kind of like the misfit corner for everyone, you know, even if you weren't selling sex, you knew someone or had someone's friend was there, you were hanging out there, you were, you know, selling drugs, doing drugs, and just chilling pretty much. So the boys of 53rd and 3rd are starting a movement, and it starts with a new style. And the style starts kind of with the boys working the corners. Tight, ripped jeans, leather jackets, a punk, okay? In the 70s, a punk was slang for hoodlum, often with homosexual undertones that hinted at gay prostitution and passive prison homosexuality. It can also refer to a young punk, a youthful upstart whose ego might be bigger than their abilities. So, before there was any real punk rock, you have to have a reason for that anger. So in the 70s, all around the world, you know, there's this new way of dressing. There's this new way of like, and it really does start with some young gay men who say, fuck it, we're going to dress whatever way we want. And then some asshole comes along the way. They call him a punk, and now it gets this term almost like kind of how it started on the streets on the corner. There was a certain look that some of the boys would wear and sell to advertise the type of thing that they were selling, I guess. This will come, the outfits, the style, the attitude will come, and then the music will follow. Then came the music of the era. Mind you, this is an angry generation, and they needed a band that was able to represent that anger, that unrest and rage. That's where the Ramones come in. Dee Dee Ramone, Johnny Ramone, Tommy Ramone, and Joey Ramone. 4 boys who all came from trauma, ended up on a street, a punk one way or another, and they understood the understood the misfits of the youth, because they were a misfit of the youth. Especially Douglas Dee Dee Ramone, who will start off as their singer and bass player and writer. Then he will give up lead vocals, focusing on just playing bass and writing. Long down the road, eventually he will go on to just retire from playing and continue writing for the Ramones. This brotherhood, this band, it's a very interesting story. But today we aren't here to talk about the Ramones, okay? But their story as a whole and what it did for music culture and what it did for a new style and a new era of children and kids was amazing and very influential, and it still is active today. They are known to influence many musicians even up until today. So they are really the peak of this movement. Like, it's been going up this train, and then bam, the music hits, and you know what music does? It brings people together. It says, yeah, I have a reason to be angry too, and now I have this music, these people, this family, this culture who gets me. And so it brings people together. And so now being called a punk wasn't, it took the power back from the word, because being called a punk was rude at times, an insult for some, and, could be very damaging to your reputation. But now these people are like, no, fuck that. Let's take it back. Sure, we are punks because you made us punks. So though today's story isn't focused on the Ramones, we have to mention them because the Ramones are the ones who cemented this 53rd and 3rd song into history that allows us a look into what life was like back in the 70s on that corner. And of course, we're talking about Dee Dee, so we cannot not talk about them. But if you're interested in music and history of music and you don't know the Ramones story, I highly suggest going in and looking up. There's a lot of people who talk about it, of course. They're music legends, and their story is very fascinating. It gives you a look into the world that was happening around that time, especially in New York. So yeah, that's something you're interested in, go check it out. So the Ramones for their time will see some decent success. However, they are now really known as founding members of the punk rock genre, and they are often inspiring today's punk rock culture. However, Dee Dee and the boys may have started a cultural movement, but they were just still very young boys floundering in this tough world. Dee Dee is still fighting his own demons. In fact, all the boys were still fighting their own demons in their own way. And Dee Dee will eventually get involved with a girl named Connie Grip. Now, Connie Grip was also a sex worker who was an addict. She'll sometimes go by Connie Ramone because she is, I think she starts out as a groupie, to be honest, in this like gritty culture. And some of these shows that they were playing were very intense and very dirty and dark. So you can imagine the type of groupies this band was getting. But Connie ends up meeting Dee Dee. They hook up and they're together for a little while. But they are not in good places. Physically, mentally healthy, not at all. Okay, who is health? Not her. So she also comes from a pretty crazy and traumatic background, I'm assuming. And people referred to her as, like, other members of his band referred to her as violent. She was a stalker, she was a prostitute, and very addicted to drugs. So kind of like Dee Dee, because he also had moments of violence. I don't know if he ever stalked anyone, but he also was a prostitute and very addicted to drugs. So they were a match made in demon heaven, apparently. So clearly this wasn't a relationship that was going to be heading down any good paths, unfortunately. And it started off very troubled, and the relationship will end very troubled, very chaotic through the entire thing. And it will come to a very chaotic end when Connie will walk in on Dee Dee cheating on her in 1977. He's living in her apartment, and she walks in, finding him with another woman, and she is rightfully very pissed off and also not in a very clear state of mind. We're talking about a drug addict here. So she gets very pissed, and she attacks Dee Dee. She will go on to break a beer bottle that was apparently laying nearby and slice Dee Dee in his ass, like really slices him, to a point where she really does leave a gnarly scar on his ass cheek that he will have for the rest of his life. Later on, his ex-wife will confirm that he still had this scar. Now, the Ramones' story as a band, family, and making their mark on the music world is a very interesting story. So like I said, if you don't know it, go check it out. But we're not here for the Ramones. We're here for Douglas, and we're here for all the other boys that were like Douglas on the corner of 53rd and 3rd. And we're here for all of the founding punks that Dee Dee met along the way to allow him to write their story. The hustlers and the punks that influenced him while walking the streets. The stories of the boys who don't get to be told because they faded into history or no one knew their name. 53rd and 3rd housed plenty of boys who came from broken homes and tough, hard places. This corner taught them hard lessons, taught them love, maybe, taught them hate, definitely. This corner showed them a different style of life. It showed them a way to survive when they thought they probably couldn't in a world that was not meant for them, and really tried to push them away. How the misfit punk culture really was born from the boys who worked the corner. Some knew Dee Dee. Some did not. Some found themselves on the corner out of pure desperation to survive. Some found themselves there for extra cash. Some just needed their next fix. And others probably just because they wanted to. Dee Dee wasn't the first of his kind, and he wasn't the last of his kind. He was just one lucky enough to be at the right place at the right moment with the right people to make history. Dee Dee will take his experience and all his fellow hustlers' experience and pour all of those feelings into a song. A song that will go ahead and cement 53rd and 3rd and all the boys who came before him and all the ones that came after him in history. It keeps their story alive. It keeps that moment alive. Dee Dee unknowingly or maybe knowingly cemented this corner in history, allowing the corner that truly birthed the punk rock movement. The boys who really put in the work to survive and to live their truth. This song that Dee Dee wrote himself is really a homage to those boys. Even if maybe at the moment he didn't know that's what he was doing and he was really singing for himself, but he was one of those boys, you know? Dee Dee's story is one of many that came out of 53rd and 3rd, but like the queens we love to learn about throughout history, some had glamorous lives. Some went into sex works because they knew it was money. Some did it for survival, and some did it to support a habit. Most came out a warrior and a better person for it. Others lost themselves to it. And there is no difference to the boys that were on 53rd and 3rd. Dee Dee grew up in a very broken world, one that he'd rather escape from than face head on. He didn't know how to face head on. As a child, his escapes looked like him retreating into his own mind, and it'll eventually morph into him being introduced to drugs that will help him escape even better. In 1978, Dee Dee will marry Vera Boldis. Vera loved Dee Dee. However, Dee Dee struggled with mental illness, alcoholism, and he was on and off again of heroin. He had a extremely bad heroin habit. And when you start something like this as a child, it is near impossible to fully come out and recover from. Those aren't easy things to overcome in general, no matter how much you pour love into someone. So their relationship, unfortunately, was a tumultuous one and will come to an end 11 years later, where they will separate in 1990 and finalize their divorce in 1995. After that, Dee Dee will continue to live the rock and roll lifestyle and eventually will go on to meet a 16-year-old Barbara Zampani in November of 1994. They meet outside a venue where Dee Dee is searching for his lost guitar. She was a fan that had been highly influenced by his earlier work and had taken up playing bass as well. Though she was very much too young for him, they end up falling in love, eventually going on to getting married, and she will spend most of her time touring with him and spending most of her days with him, as you do with your husband. Marriage, though, didn't change his need for his on and off again drug habits. So though they lived what I assume is a very happy life touring and playing music, he eventually will sadly lose his battle to his drug addiction and overdose at 50 years old on June 5th, 2002. 53rd and 3rd, if you didn't know any better, is just a song by one of the founders of punk rock. Digging into it, though, you find out how it wasn't just a song. It was the street that many called home. This song is just a call for all the boys who survived, and even more for the boys who didn't. It was Dee Dee's way of saying, I know I'm hitting it big in this music world, and I'm lucky for that, because if not, he would still be one of the punks on 53rd and 3rd. It's a song that tells you exactly the story of how punk rock became a thing and how much punk rock was born from the backs of the LGBTQ community. That, my friends, is the story of the good, the bad, the ugly, but also the glamour, the power, and freedom of 53rd and 3rd, the gritty street of New York that housed many young boys hustling to get by in a life that was trying hard to push them out. Their refusal to go away quietly, and Dee Dee Ramone, the man who lived the life of a punk on the corner of 53rd and 3rd to support his habits. And when he got lucky, he brought the story of those boys and those voiceless and told it to the world. And though they might not have listened at that moment, we listen now, forcing the world to look and listen to all those punks who were just trying to survive. I wanted to tell the story of 53rd and 3rd because though it's gritty and it's dark, it's not a life that most look forward to, and it's one that we want to kind of shy away from. It's history and it's important. Though I prefer to talk about the women and I guess men that lived high lives of sex work because it is a glamorous life and you can make lots of money from it. That's not the whole story. And we cannot run. And we cannot run from its dark past. Like everything in life, there's always some bad to good. Dee Dee had to live the life he had to end up at that corner, for all the pieces to add up, for him to be a voice to the voiceless, a voice to that movement. He had to know what was happening. He had to be there. And if he had not, would 53rd and 3rd gotten lost to history? Would it be a mystery to history today? It's hard to think about, but possibly. And what about all the streets we don't know about? All the corners that we don't know about. I feel as if this is the song for those boys, for all the boys out there who had a corner like 53rd and 3rd, who had to survive like Dee Dee Ramone, who had to do things that maybe they didn't ever expect they would, but did, and hopefully came out a better person on the end. Not all stories are good. Not all stories are bad. Dee Dee shows us that even though a punk rock legend, you don't make history by having the most cush and cookie cutter happy life. On top of that, even if you have all the pieces to become a legend, your demons can still win, even after you are a legend. My point is that we often look down on sex work. We love to look down on sex work. It's immoral, it's dirty, it's blah, 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 blah. It's inherently dangerous. And those who get into it are broken and hurt. So what? If they're getting into it because they're broken and hurt, or if they're getting into it because they know they can make a lot of money, so what? The real problem is inherently broken homes and people being pushed off and forgotten just because they make life a little bit difficult, or they question your ability of what you thought was a perfect life or a perfect person. And yes, it can be true and wrong at the same time, but this is history and this is how we learn. Just like our punk rock stars, they can be musically geniuses, but they can also be broken and struggling. We can have sex workers who are amazing and healthy and happy. And we can have sex workers who are desperate and struggling and needing help. And either way, doesn't matter, as long as we try to support and decriminalize and destigmatize to keep them safe is the important thing. Anyone can be a musical genius. Anyone can be a musical genius, but can also be broken and struggling, going down the wrong road while going down the right one. It's not sex work that makes a person broken. It's sex work that potentially empowers a said broken person, not only to survive, but hopefully thrive. That is all I have for you today on the kickoff of our spooky season. I hope you enjoyed looking into the punk rock legend, Dee Dee Ramone, but more importantly, the significance of the corner of 53rd and 3rd. Though it may have been a gritty and dirty and tough, it gave way to something more powerful and cultural shifting. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe, and leave a review if you've been enjoying my spicy takes. And until next time, I hope you have a great weekend. Goodbye.
I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh, that. I got something between my legs that'll make a dead man come. Oh.